Are you one of the thousands of teachers who are having to start teaching online overnight because of the COVID-19 crisis? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of your Pavilion ELT vloggers, and in this video I want to share with you some tips to help you feel more prepared and make sure that your students keep learning in times of social distancing. Some of the tips are for those of you who have no experience online. Others are for those of you who already know the basics but want to teach more effectively. So come with me. Teaching online is already fairly common around the world, but switching from face-to-face to online lessons is not as easy as it may sound. Some of the skills that are very useful in the classroom might not be so in an online environment, and vice versa. Classroom management has to be different. We use different types of materials and resources, and even the times that students are able to focus on one specific activity can change. It may be a scary move for many of us, especially when the change is so drastic and sudden. But by relying on what we already know about teaching, with some knowledge of the basic tools that we can use, and with a lot of patience and determination, I'm sure you'll be able to get through this, and why not? Develop some skills that will make you a more well-rounded professional. Tip number 1, be realistic about your own development. The most successful online English teachers have either had specific training or learned a lot from experience. This takes time and opportunity, something that not all of us have right now. If you're having to transition from face-to-face to online lessons, it's only natural that you feel that your lessons are not as good as usual. Some things are probably gonna go wrong, especially in the first lessons. You probably come across technical difficulties, planning lessons might take longer than usual, a lot of the activities that usually work great in the classroom might not work online, etc. It takes practice and it takes trial and error. Remind yourself and your students that we're all learning together in this situation. You don't have to rush in and try to do everything that experienced online teachers already do. And when you evaluate your lessons and your development, try to focus on the things you managed to do rather than on the things you don't. Number 2, get some input on teaching online. Instead of trying to figure everything out on your own, take advantage of all the resources and materials that are available to you. In the description of the video, I'll include links to articles from Modern English Teacher and ET Professional that can be very useful in a moment like this. A lot of trainers and professionals are also joining forces and providing us with a series of free webinars and online training courses. Get in touch with your local teacher association or join one of the many Facebook groups for teachers where you'll be able to find more information. One example of an online resource that can be useful is a course called Teach English Online, one of the winners of last year's Eltons or the Oscars of English language teaching. I'll also include the link to that one for you in the description. Tip number 2, start with the tools that you're familiar with. There's a huge number of digital tools out there that can be useful for teaching online, but you don't have to master all of them at once. Chia Suan Chong wrote a very interesting post on ET Professional's blog in which she talks about how some very common smartphone apps can be super useful in English lessons. According to her, while some of us teachers are busy finding out new apps and learning new technologies we could incorporate in our teaching, we seem to be neglecting the potential that the more classic apps can offer us. A lot of apps we already use to make video calls with our friends, such as WhatsApp, Messenger or FaceTime, can be very useful for live online lessons. And apps like Zoom and Skype even allow us to share our screen and content from our computer. Other common apps like Google Drive, Dropbox and OneDrive allow us to share materials very easily with our students and even encourage some collaborative work. Start by using the apps or software that you're already familiar with. Meanwhile, start experimenting with other more complex tools that can be more effective, such as Google Classroom, Zoom, and Edpuzzle. Then, as you become more confident, start introducing the tools to the students gradually. And remember, it's not just you. Students also have to learn how to deal with the new tools and technology. Tip number 4, stick to the principles you know. Teaching online may be very different from teaching face-to-face. But it all boils down to, well, teaching, and more importantly, learning. The principles you use in your face-to-face lessons are still going to apply in an online environment. If your students are used to a more communicative approach, try to keep your online lessons as communicative as possible. If you tend to use task-based learning in your lessons, use collaborative tasks that will be carried online. Going back to the basic principles that guide your planning and delivery of lessons may help you feel more confident. And it can also prevent situations in which students feel that the online lessons are not exactly as profitable or enjoyable as before. Tip number 5, use the right tool for the job and try to integrate the tools when possible. As I mentioned before, there are lots and lots of digital tools that you can use to teach online. Knowing which tool to use will depend on how comfortable you are using different apps and software, how your students use technology in their daily lives, and also what exactly you want technology to do for your lessons. When you teach online, most of the tools you need are probably going to help you with one of these 4 actions. Sharing materials with students, including handouts, text, videos, etc. Organizing interaction, tasks, activities and materials. Carrying out live meetings and web conferences, and adding diversity by including games, interactive online activities, etc. You can find a summary of the characteristics of the most popular digital tools in this web address here. I'll include the link in the description as well. And if you're already familiar with the basics, why don't you try to integrate different tools in order to make your lessons more dynamic? Tip number 6, flip your lessons. Have you ever heard of flipped lessons or flipped classroom? What usually happens is that we normally have our lessons with students and then we assign homework for them to keep practicing afterwards, right? The idea of the flipped lesson is to actually change this order, so homework comes before the lesson. First, students do the homework, which has videos and activities that will help them study independently the grammar or vocabulary you want them to learn. Then, the lesson itself is used to check students' understanding, deal with doubts, and more importantly, use the language students learned at home to communicate, develop speaking skills, and fluency. In a very interesting article on Modern English Teacher, Russel Stannard tells us that since we can now quickly make videos or find relevant material on the internet that relates to the teaching we do in the lesson, then we can guide the students to this material, tell them to look at it at home and learn it, and then use the class time to actually work with the new knowledge they have acquired. In order to do that, you need an online repository or a place where you can organize and share the materials with your learners. Some of the most popular options are Google Classroom, Edmodo, and Moodle. They all allow you to share links, texts, videos, and even visual explanations, all in a very organized manner. Tip number 7, test and rehearse before the lesson. There are just so many things that can go wrong with technology in an online lesson. The computer may stop working, the internet may go down, there might be software incompatibilities, so we really have to pay attention to all of that. According to Zoe Flaherty, in an article from the latest issue of ET Professional, the best solution is preventive, not reactive. At the beginning of each working day or in the hour before your lesson, spare the time to test your Wi-Fi connection speed. Make sure that nothing is preventing access to your microphone, headphones, or video cameras. Besides the technical problems that may happen, it's important for you to check if everything is working from the student's perspective. One thing that I do that really helps me is to use 2 different devices, my laptop and my phone. With my laptop, I log in and I do the actions that I will do as a teacher. And on the mobile, I pretend that I'm a student and I check if everything is working fine. Tip number 8, get feedback from the student. As I mentioned probably too many times already, the transition from face-to-face to online lessons may not go as smoothly as we plan. By being aware of what goes well and what doesn't in your lessons, you can little by little improve your performance and become a more effective online teacher. And students can give you precious feedback and information on how productive the lesson was and how effectively the technology worked. Keep an open communication channel with your students, talk to them after the lessons. And remember, the more specific the questions you ask, the more detailed the information they'll give you. I honestly hope these suggestions are helpful to you in such a turbulent moment. Let us know in the comments what strategies have you been using in order to take your lessons online. And if you want to keep this conversation going, you can join me on social media at whatisELT. Keep safe and keep teaching. See you next time.